One of the challenges that I set myself over the past couple of months was to be able to figure out how to have UIs auto-dock with Motion Builder. What I mean by that is not necessarily going to a menu item and then clicking it and having it show up and then being able to dock. What I'm talking about is more I have a workspace that I like for Motion Builder. It's got a bunch of custom tools in there, and I just want Motion Builder to be able to retain that layout so that when I come to load up Motion Builder again, it will have that layout there ready for me to go. Excitingly, if you're able to figure something out like that, you could emulate something a lot like what Maya has, where you could have like a modeling kind of setup or an animation setup. Not that you'd ever have modeling for Motion Builder, but you get the general idea, multiple different layouts. Um, and yeah, so after a little bit of time and after a little bit of figuring things out, in 2018, I figured out how to do it. And it was very simple, very rudimentary. It all happened in the Python startup folder, which is basically the first or one of the first set of scripts that Motion Builder comes and hits through all of them. And in there, all I did was a simple thing. I loaded in the UI via a UI loader and essentially showed it to the screen. Uh, this stuff is all available in a forum post, which I'm going to show you shortly, which already lives on the Autodesk forums. Um, but essentially, what I wanted to do after I'd figured out that 2018 method was move it into 2020, right? Because, hey, you'd like to know that it's working with the jump from Pi side to Pi side 2 and all this kind of stuff. And that's what this first video is going to be about. It's essentially going to outline what I feel like I have isolated the problem to be, and also the code that I've used in order to isolate that problem. Now, when Motion Builder loads up, it loads up and it does a series of things in order to generate the UI. I think it looks into the Python scripts folder first. Whilst that little splash screen is up there, it kind of figures out everything in there. And in a split second, that's when it kind of shows up the Motion Builder UI. Now, there is an awesome piece of script which I'll show you now just very quickly. It's essentially this stuff here, and you can find it at this forum address here. I will link this in the description. But essentially, what this little script allows us to do is it allows us to find all the top level widgets of Motion Builder itself, as Motion Builder is built on a Qt framework, right? So when you're going through all of that stuff, you're essentially in 2018 looking for something called MainBoard, and that's MainBoard camel cased with an M and a B, MainBoard. And knowing that that's been found means that you can essentially load up UIs and it will always kind of parent where you need it to be. It will constantly look at the layout that you've generated from a layout file, and because of that, the order of things that happen are hits your Python startup folder, generates the UI. Actually generates the main UI for Motion Builder and generates a property called MainBoard, which I believe is, as it sounds, the main board of Motion Builder. After it's done that, it finds the layout file, which notices that your pane over here is part of the layout, thus attaching it to the layout of the main board. Jobs are good and good to go. And that seemed to be the kind of order that things went in. I could be slightly off with a couple of these, but this is all just from feel, less so from digging deeper. So moving forward into 2020, what are the problems that I found? Well, a lot of the stuff kind of loads up in the same way, right? You'd first get your Python startup folder loading up, and you'd have your UI startup or whatnot, and then when it comes over to the Motion Builder side, in 2020 at least, I'm sure it probably is the same with 2019, you would get one of two results when you look through those top level widgets. You would either get MainBoard, and I've said to you before that MainBoard was spelt MainBoard M and B camel cased, whereas now we get MainBoard, just MainBoard. One word, no camel casing, which immediately is the first indicator that something has gone on here, something has happened, something has changed, something. Instead of MainBoard, what we get is ShareContextWindow. Now, context window as a concept has been used in Motion Builder documentation all over the shop. But share context window, I can't quite pinpoint what that is. But unfortunately, unless it says MainBoard, we don't get a dock. And that is where the heart of the issue is either A, MainBoard has been changed to some degree that it loads up differently sequentially, or B, MainBoard itself has been... I mean, you can still dock to MainBoard, so MainBoard is not technically the issue, I would say. It's just the way that it boots up. So 9 times out of 10, you'll get MainBoard and it'll boot up and everything will be perfectly fine and your UIs will dock, and I'm sure you could tell the rest of your team just to say, hey, just reload up Motion Builder if you don't get your UI. And yeah, once you'd kind of set that up and you'd got it to load up once, and obviously the first time you load it up, it would be floating, but then you could dock it, you could create a layout, you could close Motion Builder then and reload it, and it would look for that layout. And as I say, if we go through that sequence of events, 9 times out of 10, it would go to the Python startup folder, it would find MainBoard in 2020, it would see that your UI element is a part of the layout which it's going to load next, and it would put it into place, right? But every now and again, for a string of however many startups, you just don't get MainBoard. You get ShareContextWindow, and ShareContextWindow is not going to do anything with this particular UI element at that given time. So it's a little bit of a weird one. As I say, I think that is the closest that I've been able to kind of like chase this thing into a corner, and I think if I get any closer, it's just going to scurry away, and I'm not necessarily going to find an answer. But thankfully, after re-recording these videos about 3 or 4 times, I do finally now have an answer that's good enough for me, at least, good enough for me to work with, which does get docking working consistently. But in order for us to actually, get onto that point, we've really got to appreciate the problem, right? And uh, as I've just been recording a video and restarted again, Motion Builder did fail to load up my custom UI and my custom layout. So what I wanted to do was just show you very quickly what I'm printing out to the Python console. And you can see here I've got a couple of print statements. So we've got 2020 startup module. That's just to print out, just to my sanity check to make sure that it's actually working. Share context window and context window found. Now these are 2 printouts which are essentially saying the same thing, right? But essentially what it's telling me in this context is the share context window has been found. What we're going to do is we're just going to do a quick restart, and hopefully we get the load this time around. If it won't be this time, it'll be maybe 1 or 2 more loads and we'll get the layout working fine. But the main thing to take away from this is it's not doing it consistently. It will load now. There you go. How did I know that? Well, every single time it seems like that little pane, that little rig controls pane that I've made kind of shows up in the middle of the screen. It seems to be that then it will auto dock. But every time that I see it populate in the top left hand portion of where Motion Builder is, that's when it doesn't auto dock. And if I go to the window now and I go Python Editor, you'll see, okay, 2020 startup, MainBoard, no context window, and I print back MainBoard again. I think I'm actually printing back the accessible name twice here. But essentially, yeah, I didn't need this script any further than what I've shown you, and I'll just show you what that script does very quickly. So let's just get over the whole holding control thing to get Motion Builder to act normally. So yeah, this is that slice of code that I was getting from the Autodesk forums, and essentially what this is as it says, get dialog parent, right? So MoBu window in this particular instance is the result of get dialog parent, and that is the top level widgets of the Q application, and it goes round. And yeah, that's about it, right? So the top level widget at that given point, the parent widget, should be main context window, but every now and again we get share context window, right? So this is all this is basically doing. MoBu window, get the dialog parent, get me the accessible name and print it back, so that either gets me the MoBu MainBoard that we need to be the parent versus the share context window. So if it comes down and it finds that it is share context window, then just print that a context window has been found. Else there's no context window found. That's the print statement that I can probably get rid of. And also, once you've found that there is no context window, load up my rig controls and show them. So yeah, that's kind of the meat and potatoes of the problem as far as I've chased it into a corner. Now, I'd like to say that we could change this get dialog parent to wait until we find, say, maybe no share context window, and we actually find the main board. And that would be a pretty cool thing to do, actually, thinking about it, because the way that I load up my UIs relies very heavily on this, get dialog parent, and it does look for the correct thing to be there. It's just very interesting that everything up to 2018, we've always been able to find MainBoard, and then now we seem to be finding things like share context window, which is getting in the way of us being able to do anything. As I said before, my UIs rely heavily on this function of get dialog parent and being able to load a UI into that. As I say, the forum post below that I'll put in the description is something that I've always relied quite heavily on in order to get UIs to load in. The back end of how I normally load in UIs was written by somebody else, but by deconstructing it and looking through it in this way, I realize where the kind of limitations are. So really what we need to do is we need to find a more reliable way to load up all of our UIs, especially in my case, Qt based, .ui files, load them in a much more reliable way, in a much more native way with Motion Builder. And in the next video, when you actually see what I've done to combat this, it's nothing new. It's nothing new at all. But I think just setting it up in the way that I have may be something that alleviates a lot of problems for people in the future.